Hello, and welcome to the RVTV podcast, The Roanoke Valley Then and Now. On today's show, we are remembering the flood of 1985. This is part 2 of our podcast about stories from the flood of 1985. On our last podcast, we heard from Roanoke City Fire-EMS Chief David Hoback about his personal experience with the flood of 1985. On today's podcast, you'll hear from 5 people who also had their own personal experience dealing with the flood of 1985. Our first guest is Deborah Bergeron.
I was a 4th grade teacher at Raleigh Court Elementary School. On that particular day of the water rising, the principal came into my classroom, or all of our classrooms, and said, "You guys, we're shutting school down. The buses are coming. You guys need to go home." And so I got in the car and I started driving towards Salem, I lived in the Cherokee Hills subdivision. I have 3 children. 2 of them were at Glenver Elementary School. One was a kindergartner and one was a 1st grader. And then I had an 18-month-old baby that was in a private home for daycare up in Salem. So as I'm driving down Main Street in Salem going towards, I was going to go pick my children up and take them home. And then I met someone. It was another parent that said, "Oh, you can't go to Glenver. They won't let you up there." So we've been told that the kids are safe, everybody's safe, but they're not releasing any students, and they're not bringing buses in, and they're not letting parents come, and they're not, it is. Well, it turns out that the kids had to spend the night there at the school. So that was interesting. But I knew they were safe. So I thought, well, I'll go get my 18-month-old baby. And as I came up towards that area, I noticed that the road was just massive water. I mean, not just a trickle. It was a lot of water. But something about the mother kicked in with me, because I looked up on the hill. There's a little incline, and I looked up there and I could see the babysitter's house, and the water was already up to her front door. I mean, I could see that, so it scared me, and I could, no cell phone, couldn't call her, didn't know what to do. So I found a dry area, a little strip mall on Main Street that was way up off of the water area, and I drove up there, and I parked my car, got out, and started walking down the hill and walked right into that water with the intention of going across the water to get to my baby. So I'm a non-swimmer. I'm very much afraid of water. And so this was a big deal for me, So I'm treading through the water. Slowly it's getting to, chest high on me. And it's fairly, rapid. It was going pretty quick. But I knew I was going to get up there and get my baby and then trudge back to my car and make it home. And as I'm about halfway across, I hear this man yelling at me, and he's going, "Lady, stop. Stop, lady, stop." But I was determined, so I just kept on going. And the next thing I know, he comes up behind me and grabs hold of my arm, and he was a firefighter. He dressed in all of his gear, and he looked at me and he said, "What are you doing?" And I started sobbing. I said, "My baby's at that house up there. I have to go get her." And he said, "You do realize that with water like this, the manhole covers could have popped up. There was gook down there, it was all nasty and everything." He said, "You could slip and fall." He said, "I hope you're a good swimmer." I said, "Well, I don't know how to swim." So it felt like an eternity that we stood there and just looked at each other like, what are we going to do? Because here I am in water up to my chest, and he just didn't know. So he said, "Okay, here's the plan." He said, "I'm going to take you by the arm, walk you over there. We're going to walk up to her door, knock on the door, and try to get your daughter." So we did that. And when the babysitter came to the door, her eyes were as wide as saucers because not only did she have mine, but she had 2 others. And so the firemen then had a new problem. You know, what are we going to do about, you know, once I get Deb across the water, what are we going to do? So he explained to her, you know, that what he would do was if she would hand carry my daughter to him, he would carry her on his shoulder, give the diaper bag and all the bottles and everything to me. I would carry that on my shoulder, and he would help me get back across the water. And he did that. And we were both young. I mean, I was 32 at the time. He was probably even younger than that, you know. But it was quite the moment, I will say. And gosh, I don't even know who he was, but he helped me in that time. And then as he got me back to my car, and I was muddy and but I was so thankful to, you know, to be out of that. And then they kind of guided me and told me where to go, take some back roads to try to get to my house so I wouldn't be confronted with that again. So I made it home, but he turned around and he went back and helped the other, you know, helped that lady somehow. I'm not sure what he ended up doing, but he helped her. And so, you know, it was a good story, but boy, it was scary. It was super scary. And then the next morning, Glenver Elementary let the buses come, you know, and the water receded by that point to where they could make the trip up the hill. And so parents were, you know, obviously knocking on their door wanting to get their kids. But, you know, it just showed that people, they really wanted to help one another. That's all it really amounted to. Because everybody was scared. You know, we didn't know what to expect. So that was, and I see that memory like it happened yesterday. So for me, it was very impactful.
Thank you, Deborah, for sharing your story. Our next guest is Susan Smith.
Well, I was working for a small insurance brokerage 2.5 days a week, and we were located over on Reserve Avenue. And there were probably maybe five of us working on that particular day in our office, some others in the other part of the building. This was the Hamlet Company's building that was attached to the side of Moore's Superstores at the time. So when we decided not to go to lunch, I went back to my desk, and all of a sudden somebody came running down the hall and said, "The river is coming down the street." And I thought, that's not a big deal. We'll just drive out it, you know. Well, I went to the door and looked out, and sure enough, it was the river coming down to the street. And by then, just within a 30-minute period of time of looking out the door, decided not to go to lunch, and then this call that there was the river coming down the street. The river really was rushing down the street, and by then the water was about up to the bottom of the tires on our cars. And so there was really no driving out of the building that day, and with what was to, I'm not sure of the decision makers what was going through their minds, but I'm sure it was how to get us out of that building. So what they finally ended up doing was there was a big lumber truck with Moores. They backed it up to the porch on the building and put pieces of lumber across there. So here about 20 people were walking up these pieces of lumber, sitting on top of the truck, the bed of this truck that was piled high with lumber in the middle of the pouring rain. And that's how we went out of that building. So when we left, the water was pretty much up to the bottom of our cars, to the tires. And then so we started down Reserve Avenue towards Franklin Road. And we took a left there going over the bridge. And at that time, the only way you knew there was a bridge there was you could see the tops of the railings. So we went on out Franklin Road, and the owner of our business lived in a home on top of Peakwood Drive. So there we all went on top of that lumber in the pouring rain, and the truck took us up to Peakwood Drive. and where we could dry out and try to reach our families, which was a challenge in itself because we didn't have cell phones like we do today in that time. So tracking down, my husband worked for Nabisco at the time and was out and about, so I really could not get in touch with him, but I was able to get my father. And our home was near Bonsack, but he finally figured out a way and a meeting location, so we ended up meeting at Hills out at Cave Spring Corners, the old Hills, and that's how I was able to connect with somebody. So that's how they got us out of the building that day. Well, what we later found out, once the waters receded and we were able to take a look at the offices, there was 6 feet of water in those offices, so we were very fortunate to get out of the offices.
Our next guest is Kent Henson.
I was a senior in high school, and I volunteered with Vinton first aid crew, and still fairly new there as a 17-year-old. And we had several small rescues that were really easy. We didn't have a boat. Our other 2 boats, Little John boats, were out on rescues already, so they had been busy all day. Later on, in just a brief calm, the dispatch come across, asked if anyone had a boat available for a rescue. We had one there from Hardy Rescue Squad, and we took the call, and it was out at Plantation and Hollins Road, where the food line and the Walmart is now, for a vehicle underwater. So we hooked up and got out, and it took us about an hour to make our way all the way out there. And we got there, and if you can picture that little area in the dip there, it was just completely covered in water. They were just building food line and had dug the ditches beside the road for plumbing and piping and things like that. Apparently this car had gotten swept over and fell down into that ditch, and the headlights were still on, which is amazing. Roanoke City Fire Department was on the Eli Lilly side, trying to stick their ladder out to the car and climb out on it, but their ladder back then weren't made for horizontal extension, and they were dipping into the water. We tied off with ropes, and 2 of them jumped in the boat, and the rest of us that were there had walked out into the water far enough where the rope would go to us and then curve over to allow the boat to get right to the car. And we were out, had to go out far enough, water was like up to our chests. I was rushing water. Thankfully, there was enough of us there to hold each other up and hold on to the ropes. Debris hitting us in the back. But they got over to her and pulled her out, and thankfully she was fine. And we pulled the boat back, and she got in the ambulance, and they took her on in the ambulance. It was so prominent and such a huge event in the valley. It ranks up there with some of the big fires I'd been on or things like that. Certainly the busiest I've been involved in rescue and things. So something good that came out of it, though, it prompted the creation of swiftwater rescue teams and all of the other heavy tactical rescue teams that the valley now has in need.
Our next guest is Clarice McIntosh.
Well, a couple of days before it had been steadily raining, I guess about a week. And that's what led up to all of this water coming into the complex. I was at my apartment, which was at Willow River Apartments. I was at my apartment all the way down on the far end. Well, my husband and I, we noticed that the river had gotten high in the back and that the drains started to fill, but the drains would fill anyway when it would rain, so we just thought that the drains would fill and that would be it. So later on, the water started getting higher and higher, and we noticed that it was getting so high, he took one of our cars up to higher ground in the complex, and we lost it. So then as it got higher, it covered the cars that was parked in front of the buildings, and one of our neighbors went over. He lived across from us, so he went in his apartment, had to retrieve something. So he thought he had drowned because it was a couple of feet from his bottom apartment ceiling. So all of a sudden he started coming out, and he didn't know which way to go because the cars were all covered with water. And my husband said, "There's some cars along there, try to get up on one of those." And then he threw out a line, but panicked and didn't hold on to the other end of the line so he could reel him in. But he finally found the cars, and then he swam on into the building. And so that was already almost up to second floor, the water was. Finally, maintenance, and I don't know whether it was people from the fire department or what, but they came down with the boat. And I said, "Well, I can't swim. I hope this boat's gonna make it," you know. So my apartment was on second floor, and we climbed up to the stairway and had to climb over that rail on the second floor to get in the boat. That's just how high the water was. So we climbed over in there, and they took us to higher ground. So I think they made like 2 trips from the end that we were at the bottom of the complex. So they took us all the way up to about farther than middle ways the complex in the boat. They let us off, and then we was on our own. We kind of piddled around during the day until somebody had made some arrangements for us to go to the Civic Center. But in the process, my husband stayed down with all that water around the buildings. And my godson, they stayed down for about 2 days with all that water around the buildings. I think they were on 3rd floor because my godson lived on 3rd floor. So they stayed up on 3rd floor, and he said, well, the water was around the buildings and they kept hearing noises, and the wind was blowing tin that had came loose. And he said, well, I don't know what we're gonna do. But they offered him to come out on the boat, but he refused. So I guess, he could swim for one thing, so he and my godson, so I guess they figured that if something went wrong, they would try to swim out of there. Well, we went to the Civic Center, and they had all kinds of people helping out, food and stuff like that. And then I think our kids were still at school, so I think the road was blocked. They were up toward where the VA is, and the schools were. So we didn't get them until about 7, 8 o'clock at night at the Civic Center. The teachers came with them. And that was a great thing. They looked out for them. It was just, I don't know what to say about it. I was just kind of upset, and then I was thankful that we had saved our lives. We didn't drown, and then that the maintenance guys did a great job of getting everybody out of the complex. It was a terrifying day.
Thank you, Clarice, for sharing your story. And our final guest is Elizabeth Batchelder.
I was teaching music at Roanoke College. And I was also, I'm a pianist. I was a member of the Kandinsky Trio. And at that time, there was a series at Roanoke College whereby they would bring in affiliate artists. And I was to meet an affiliate artist who was going to spend a week in Roanoke, and she was going to perform. We were performing together at Roanoke College, and she was going into the city schools and some of the county schools as well to present concerts. And I was her pianist. I was also her driver, apparently. And I drove up from New River Valley, and there wasn't any sign of any kind of weird weather down there. But when I came to pick her up, she was staying at the Holiday Inn, which is at Lakeside. And of course, Lakeside was totally different then. I picked her up. She had the most expensive cello that I had ever heard of or seen in my life. It was a 17th century maker, and it's very rare cello. And we put that in the back of my almost brand new 1985 Toyota Corolla. And we were going to cross Mason Creek from the Holiday Inn to go back to Roanoke College and get established, show her the venue and all of that. And then we had some schools to go to. So we put the cello in the back seat, and I start driving, and we go past what used to be the Kroger's, which is now the Goodwill. And I see the front doors open, and a crowd of people are coming out into a very flooded parking lot, maybe 3 or 4 feet of water. And the women, we all wore dresses then pretty much. The women had their dresses hiked up above their knees to get out. And I thought, well, that's weird. And we got to about to cross Mason's Creek, and it was backup. Cars were really slow. And as I watched, I saw a Volkswagen floating down the creek. And I looked at her, I looked at that cello, I looked at the traffic in front of me, and I thought about my car, which was a manual transmission. And I thought about how I really didn't want to lose my new car or this very expensive cello. So I actually stopped, turned around, we went back to the Holiday Inn, and I tried to get a phone, call my husband in Blacksburg, Christiansburg. Of course, he had no idea there was anything like this going on. And I was all worried that it was very local and that we really needed to be somewhere else and that we were going to be late. But once we started seeing helicopters flying over Lakeside, and we actually saw a rescue, we actually saw somebody being pulled out with a helicopter during the day. I ended up staying there that day. I did not get home. I think it was the next day before I got home. That's pretty much what I remember. Very frightening to think, that it could have gone another way. And I don't know what gave me the presence of mind to decide not to. I think it had a lot to do with that cello. It was such a valuable instrument. And we had just met, and I wanted to make sure I did the right thing. So pretty glad I did. It's so much devastation. And now that I live in Salem, or in the county, I've seen so much of what can happen with that kind of natural disaster.
Thank you to all our guests today who spoke about their experiences with the flood of 1985. Deborah Bergeron, Susan Smith, Kent Henson, Clarice McIntosh, and Elizabeth Batchelder. Thank you again for joining us on the podcast and sharing your memories with us. And thank you for listening to the RVTV podcast, The Roanoke Valley, Then and Now. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you next time.